have some, anyway, I would really like for y'all to talk to. So on the background, so I just wanted to know, so Blood of Jesus, again, was found in 1983 after being lost for 42 years. And also, so we've seen that. Tomorrow we will be seeing the Big Show, which is also in the SMU library. Right now, on the screen behind us, if I can get the projectionist, we're going to be showing some things that are from the TAMI archives. So they'll be playing silently in the background here. So I would like for you to please talk about, if your mic's on, please talk about what, okay. Can we start with Dr. Worland? If you'll talk about what all is in the SMU archives, kind of where it started, how that became a thing, and then we'll move to you, Elizabeth, okay?
Well, thank you very much, Kelly, for inviting me here to talk about the films from the G. William Jones Film and Video Archive, which is part of the Hammond Arts Library system and the whole SMU library system at SMU. It's been under that jurisdiction since the mid-1990s, which means in many ways it was a really good thing because it put the collection on the university's budget and got to be more integrated into our teaching, into our research, and often for research for outside scholars. I've been at SMU since 1991, and when I was first hired in the fall of 1991, Bill Jones was a faculty member there, and I learned a lot about the archive at that time. Unfortunately, after that very first semester, Bill got very ill and got cancer that he ultimately succumbed to about a year and a half after that. So I really only knew him and worked with him very briefly, but I saw the legacy that he had created. And if those of us who are old enough here who remember this, that going back to the 1960s and 70s, and when I took a film class first time was in the 1970s, late 70s, and where did you get the films? How could you actually show a class films? And in most cases, that meant you were showing 16mm prints of movies that were available from various distributors, sometimes in varying quality versions, especially when you talked about silent films that were shown. You were looking at versions of film that had been completely cut up and that were not anything like they had originally looked to a great extent in the past. And so Bill Jones started collecting movies of all types, both in all formats and all genres and categories, on both 16mm and 35mm. And so he was actually using them for teaching purposes. That's really ultimately what it was for. But because he was a film lover, he started actually forming this Southwest Film Video Archive, as it was called at the time, and they were collecting movies actively. What happened was that in this and other archives, a lot of times, you probably get this all the time, please tell us more about that, but people just sort of call up randomly and will say, I've got this stuff, I don't really know what to do with it, I might just throw it away if you don't want it. So you want it, and most archives and archivists will say, oh yeah, we'll look at it. Because they can make the professional decision to throw it away if stuff is damaged or duplicated, or they'll pass it on or whatever. And so the collection that included the Tyler, Texas black films were originally held in a warehouse here in Dallas, in downtown Dallas. And at a certain point, I'm not quite sure when, maybe around the late 70s, they had been moved to it was a distribution center, a distribution warehouse. And what used to happen when they were moving 35mm film prints all over the country, sometimes prints would be left behind at regional distribution centers just because they were big and heavy and bulky and it was expensive to ship them back. And the studios would kind of, So the movies got left, some movies and prints got left behind. And so those prints, whatever was in this distribution warehouse in Dallas, got moved to Tyler in the late 70s to another warehouse It sat there for a number of years, and apparently, and it was much of it was 35 millimeter original nitrate print films, that are highly flammable but beautiful silver screen. The meaning of the term silver screen was not silver nitrate film stock. And I've seen some of those films, some of those original prints. Typically what happened was the person contacted Bill Jones and said, we're selling this warehouse, or we're moving stuff out of here, and all this junk is going to go, and do you want this, or it's going to go in the trash? And Bill said, yes, I want this. So he rented a truck, they got some money from school, they went out, and a lot of the films, by the way, were Hollywood movies from the 1930s and 40s. They were prints of Hollywood movies. But among them were a chunk of about 35 titles or so of the race movies, or black audience films, as they're more typically called today, which states directly this is who they were intended for. And so a lot of these films, a lot of these titles had been collected by the Library of Congress and a couple of other archives. It's always worthwhile to have additional copies of rare films. But what Bill Jones and the Tyler, Texas discovery really did was bring race movies back into a kind of national consciousness. And they actually discovered these films in February of 1983 or 84, I think is when this happened, when it got publicized. So it was Black History Month.
Oh, wow.
And that meant it got a lot of national press exposure. And Bill actually was on the long-running ABC television series Nightline in 1983 or 84. I'm a little vague on the discovery versus when they were. I think if they were found in '83, and the kind of media excitement occurred in February '84. I think that's correct. And so it got this national publicity. And so there were really, prior to that time, just a really small group of archivists and scholars who were even aware of these movies anymore. That there had been about a 20-year gap in which the movies had been largely out of circulation, and they hadn't been much in circulation in the 50s and early 60s. They were only ever generally shown on Southern television stations late at night at 3 in the morning. So that stations that had federal licenses, federal broadcasting licenses, they could pretend that they were serving the public interest of their black viewers by running The Blood of Jesus at 3 in the morning. And then after that, the civil rights movement is ongoing, they just drop out of circulation. So the real important thing that Bill did in making these films publicly available was to make them make public awareness of them, national awareness. And since that time, there's been a much more active effort on the part of the International Film Archives to find these films and preserve them and show them, and people like me and lots of others to teach these films and show them to audiences and show them to students and public audiences in a kind of educational historical context. So that's a long academic answer to that question.
Thank you. We got that. Okay, Elizabeth, will you talk about TAMI for us?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think there's some credits up here, but you can primarily see our films from the Tarrant County Black Historical and Genealogical Society. So these are maybe home movie style films, but they are primarily from I M Terrell High School in Fort Worth. And this is, TAMI and the Texas Archive of the Moving Image. If you're not familiar with us, you can find us at texasarchive.org. I think we're the continuation of some of the work that Bill Jones did. We are an archive that is not as interested in collecting physical materials, but in getting those physical materials back into a format that people can watch them in. So over the last 20 years, we have digitized more than 50,000 films and videos of Texas. And that includes, some, longer films, but a lot of it is home movies, local television, industrial films, which Dallas has a very rich tradition of making. And that kind of ties back to The Blood of Jesus as well, with the Jameson Film Company, which is one of my favorite stories in Texas media history. So, we are trying to get these things out there so people can watch them and appreciate them, much in the way of distributing a print of The Blood of Jesus does that too. So, And the materials we're working with, again, we're open to kind of anything. We have a very open collecting policy and open to the discovery of new things. So people can bring us a home movie collection. We will digitize it for them. They will get those back. They'll get the digital copies and the originals. And then from that, we'll try to find content that we will incorporate into texasarchive.org so other people can appreciate it.
And on texasarchive.org, you can go down the rabbit trail. Hello. I've done it many, many times. And just start searching for things, and you'll find just about anything that you search for. It's a remarkable resource.
Well, I was saying Rick is actually in a video on our website from Texas Entertainment News in the 90s, did a story about the blood of Jesus, and they interviewed you.
So apparently my historical film is in there, which I don't even remember doing, and so I'm guardedly optimistic and interested about seeing it.
And we actually have a couple other things that directly relate. One is footage of Spencer Williams in his role as Amos and Andy, right, as Andy. And if you're not familiar with what that was, it started as a radio show, basically audio blackface. But then they made a television show out of it, and they found black actors to portray the characters. So Spencer Williams was a television star from that film, or from that show. And we have footage of him going to Lubbock, Texas, to do a telethon in the role of Andy that you can see on the site. And then just this week, we recently got a grant to work on The Eyes of Texas, which is a show shot by the Houston's KPRC, similar to Texas Country Reporter, which was shot by a Dallas-based crew. But we actually found an interview with Bill Jones talking about the discovery of these films. That is now up on the site. We got it up this week, so you can go and see that too.
So more and more and more. I love that. I love that. Where do you see the future of this going? And how can we, the audience, or lovers of film, how can we help make this continue to go on? Any ideas?
I have lots of ideas, mainly around money, because digitizing films costs a lot of money. Doing restorations is a very expensive process, and the actual kind of proper way to preserve a film is on film, and doing work like that costs so much money that it's not something that you can really do with something like a home movie. So that's kind of where we lean into digitization. But I mean, I also think sharing your own content, but also sharing the content that you find and making people aware that these things are out there and have value.
Right. Do we have any questions from the audience? Yes.
Why the hell would you make us cry like that?
Yeah. You're welcome. Didn't mean to.
And I actually had a comment on the experimental film you showed, which was quite compelling.
Yeah.
But I think we see Jack Lemmon, correct, in there, talking about film preservation.
Yes.
I don't know for sure, but my guess is that's probably from the large Hollywood campaign that started the National Film Preservation Foundation. A group of Hollywood actors, producers went to Congress and said, hey, this is important, this is our heritage. And the National Film Preservation Foundation and the National Film Registry were born out of that. And I think we actually at the Texas Archive are right now working on a similar project with the Association of Moving Image Archivists around local television, which is rotting away, if it's even been saved, is rotting away right now. So film itself, if kept in good condition, can last for over 100 years, most aren't. But videotape only has a few decades of life. So we are in a real crisis right now with videotape. If you have home movies or anything on VHS, please get them digitized with someone before it's too late.
That's a good point.
And what they used to do, like a lot of television shows in the 1960s and 70s, after things that were actually shot on videotape, like live events and a lot of shows and so on. After a certain point, they bulk erase the tapes and use them over. So for example, there is, unless somebody has more current news, there is no continuous network broadcast coverage of the first Super Bowl.
Oh, wow.
There's lots of film and excerpts of it, but the actual broadcast doesn't exist.
Wow.
A lot of the Johnny Carson Tonight shows in the 60s don't exist.
First show doesn't exist.
What's that?
The first show,
The first show
doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Well, in the nightly news, I believe the Vanderbilt Film Archive or Vanderbilt News Archive starts in 1968. And so they have records of the nightly news on major networks from there on, but before that, the LBJ Library has 1 year before that.
1 year.
But it's in almost inaccessible format, so it's not something that anyone can see.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
But like game shows from the 60s and 70s, mostly gone. Again, you say, well, is that a big loss? But on the other hand, yeah, in certain ways it is. In certain ways it is.
Sean?
Yeah, Rick, can you talk about, so like, the creation of ARC because that's a recent film that was done.
I cannot, but can you?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Do you want to come up here, Sean?
Well, I can just shout from here.
Okay.
I'm from a big family, I know.
Sean Griffin is my friend and colleague.
Yes.
That as part of all the footage that was made, that was used for that short, comes from SMU's archive. We don't have tons of prints of every Hollywood movie ever made.
Right.
You're correct about that some of that footage is taken from a short promotional thing that was done in the mid-'80s to call for film preservation that was narrated by Jack Lemmon. So the shots of Citizen Kane and Casablanca and all that stuff came from, and Singing in the Rain came from that. But a large portion, and why it's called ARC, is that SMU has a print of the 1926 silent film Noah's Ark. And so some of it is trying to talk about sort of like destruction of civilization, wiping it out, and tying it to the ideas of preservation as well. So
That was great.
There's some footage from another tribute to Hollywood called Precious Images. Some of that is there, but it was something that was created out of the archive at SMU to talk about the need for archive there.
Great. Thank you for that context.
Precious images is great.
So, tell us about, I don't know, what we're seeing here is.
I believe this is state fair or actually Texas Centennial footage. Shot by the Jameson Film Company, who also processed some of the stock films. And actually, I ran out to the hallway at the beginning of Blood of Jesus because I remembered I had a transcript of an interview with Bruce Jameson, who owned the Jameson, or he was the son of Hugh Jameson, who started that film company here in Dallas. And if you don't know about that, we have an online exhibit called Mavericks and Madmen. You can look up online and learn about. But Jameson moved here from Kansas in the 20s. He was an itinerant filmmaker. He got down to Dallas, liked the weather better, is the like rumor. But ended up starting a large business that both processed film and produced film. And so he was involved in the stock films. And Bruce Jameson, in a oral history he did with a colleague of mine, John Slade, who may or may not be here, talked about, he never had the opportunity to meet Spencer Williams, Bruce, the son of Hugh, but Go Down Death, I think it's the third in this trilogy of films, Jameson was involved in reconstructing the soundtrack because apparently the actual soundtrack for that movie was recorded so poorly it was unusable. So they shelved the film for several years, and then there was interest in trying to make a new soundtrack, and he even talks about going with his wife to audition voice actors to do those parts.
Interesting. Wow, very cool.
Oh, and then also, I would say Jameson also processed the Zapruder film, which is like one of the claim to fame, but also did tons of commercials, industrial films, government films, things like that. And lots of people came out of the Jameson Film Company, including Joe Camp, who made Benji. So
Right,
lots of people
right.
worked there that went on to do other things.
Right, wonderful. Oh, Bart?
So I just want to say, aside from preserving the films for their own benefit, one of the things that's really important about film preservation is the anthropological value of looking at what the world looked like.
Yes.
Both in terms of what was there, but also the sort of cultural mores of the time. And really understanding the past through looking at this is just really quite important in so many ways. And indeed, there's a lot of material that's lost forever. And when you lose your history, people get to reinvent it and sometimes lie.
Yeah.
So having real documentary evidence of this world, you know, I think it's just really kind of critical.
Thank you for that part. Yes, Martin?
Professor, is there any, do you ever come across how Alfred Sack and Spencer Williams connected initially? Is there any history on that that you've heard of?
Not that I know of. We do know that Spencer Williams was working as an actor and then doing various kinds of small jobs and parts, bits in crew things that he was allowed to do because he couldn't get the unions. In the 20s, in the late 20s and 30s, he's working in LA. Alfred Sack was a kind of niche producer of exploitation movies, and exploitation means movies that were playing, that really means movies that were based more on the topical subject matter or kind of hyper promotion, essentially. I mean, that word to me conjures American International Pictures, AIP, in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, which I grew up watching those movies and loving them. But that term goes back much further, and so exploitation means it's just these things, low-budget films made off Hollywood, essentially, that were, again, mostly based on some kind of promotion. So Alfred Sack, both before and after these movies, produced those kinds of niche movies. But what really seems to be the case is that, and I think the film that we saw, Stephen Robinson's film, and Mr. Jones's film, caught, was that he really did seem to kind of step back and let him make the movie. He was providing the means to make these movies, and he was wise enough to understand, I can't make this for a black audience. I need a black filmmaker, and I need black voices, black sensibility, etc. And so they're made very, very cheaply. So how they met, no, I would love to know the answer to that, but I don't.
Thank you.
Yes.
I know that Blood of Jesus was made for segregated theaters that would only have black audiences in them, like it wouldn't be shown at a theater like this in the 1940s. Do you know about how many segregated theaters there were in the country or in Texas?
Well, no, I don't have a number, but the answer is there were some that were totally segregated theaters, but in lots of places, blacks could see movies with whites, but they sat in segregated seating, usually in the balconies. And apparently what these films, when they were shown, the race movies were shown, they either played in totally black neighborhood theaters that only catered to black audiences, or they played in what were called just midnight rambles, midnight screenings of movies that after, like say in 1941, they might have watched, The Maltese Falcon or something. And then when the regular shows were over, at midnight, black audiences could come in and see these movies or anything else, but they would just be a black audience only screening. So they were shown in, probably a variety of situations. And I really suspect these more religious themed movies like Blood of Jesus were probably shown, especially kind of special showings for church groups and so on. Because it's always struck me that if you look at like the costumes worn by the devil and the angel, yeah, it's a low-budget movie, but if you really kind of think of the aesthetic of this as being like a church pageant, a church program that was put on, that's what it looks like.
Yeah.
And I think that's not from poverty. I think that's almost like by design. This is it's for a church audience, essentially, especially in the South.
And I think, just for a little tiny bit of context, this theater, the Plaza Theater, was built in 1941. So I think that sort of thing's interesting. Anything else? Oh, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to ask a question. I went to SMU. How would you view some other films in the collection?
Yes.
Yeah, well, there's a variety of ways to see some of these films. But if you contact the SMU G. William Jones Film and Archive Collection, you just look online and you'll be able to find it through the SMU website. You can get to our archivists and they can point you to some of the stuff is available online. There's widely varying versions of these films that you can find on YouTube. There's an excellent collection that I'll recommend that we have two of our films, including Blood of Jesus and Dirty Gertie from Harlem, USA, which was one of Spencer Williams' last films. It's included on this box set of DVD and Blu-ray that's called Pioneers of African American Cinema. And I believe that, I haven't looked it up, but I believe that collection is available on Netflix or some kind of streaming platform as well, just Pioneers of African American Cinema. And it's got Oscar Michaud and filmmaker and George Randall and William D. Alexander, these filmmakers from the, Oscar Michaud's working in the 20s originally. His surviving films are there. Newsreels, all kinds of interesting stuff. And that's a very good collaboration of scholars and film archives. It's excellent, yeah.
So we need to wrap up really quick. Oh, do you have a follow-up? Please, go ahead.
Another thing was, you said it was like a church parade.
Pageant?
A church pageant.
But you have to remember, during that time period, there wasn't any place for black African Americans to go to.
Yeah.
So the only place that you really had is besides the juke joint was to go to church. And
Right.
the church was the place where you really dressed up, and you had a position, you had things, you had, you were on the usher board, or you were in the choir. So that's where you shine during the week, was there? So it wasn't a pageant, that was really what you saw every Sunday.
Right.
Yeah, no, thank you, that's an important clarification.
Yeah,
I mean, again, I think in the context of that, and it's just so perfect, from my understanding of this history, is that the movie is about just this opposition between the church and the juke joint, just as you say.
Yes.
Personally, I like the music in both places.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you. Is there anything that you want to say before we wrap up?
I was just going to piggyback on what Bart said in that, preserving these films and videos, part of this, if you think about the way we tell history in the US or in European influenced culture, it's based on the archive. So if something doesn't exist that can be cited, it's not written about. So the preservation of film and video from a variety of communities is really important in being able to tell those community stories.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Worland. Thank you, Elizabeth
Thank you.
Hansen. Thank you.